Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Carousel podcast. It's been a few weeks. I've been traveling for Urban Assembly and other things, so happy to be back and very excited to introduce my guest for today, Richard Cromwell, who is a writer for the Federalist, a strategist, copywriter, and marketing, and a food podcaster. He has a podcast called Coffee and Koshan. What's your Twitter handle?
It's R Cromwell 4,
Cromwell
the number 4.
Right.
And I'll just go ahead and so I'm the fourth. My actual first name is Joseph. And so by the time they got to me, they had to go to the middle name. So Joseph Richard. And there are a surprising number of Rich Cromwells in the world. So when I started Twitter, I couldn't get the straight one. So I had to go add the 4 at the end.
So you put 4 in there. Wow. So a long line.
Yes.
Very interesting. And so, yeah, you and I have a ton of alignment because we are both politically aligned and we are in the world of propaganda making.
Yes.
And also, I love food. So, like, so much of what I want to do, and like, I think food can be propaganda in its own right. And so, I love your food podcast. I just listened to the episode about Bourdain. And so I just feel like we have so much overlap. So let's just like get right into it. What is your beat for the Federalist? And then what is your kind of like marketing experience?
So for the Federalist, it's actually coming up on the today, tomorrow, somewhere around there. We're on the anniversary of the first article I ever published in 2013. And it started off a lot more political. My first article was about traffic cops and how it's just a ploy to make money rather than being about public safety.
Yeah.
And I've covered, child tax credits, some economic stuff, but over time it's evolved to be more focused on the culture side and more on some humor stuff. So it's just kind of I don't have a real specific like, oh hey, we're discussing this new tax policy, we're going to go to Rich for that. It's
right
more like, hey, can you review this the final Norm Macdonald special or whatever.
Yeah, and I think you have really incisive insight into culture and sort of like analogies around certain things. Like in the Bourdain episode of your most recent podcast, I thought that you just had really cool commentary on you had a great kind of passage analyzing the final text messages between Bourdain and
Argento.
Asia Argento.
Yeah.
And you said, oh, I knew her, I knew about her father because I studied film. And then you said that he has this thing where female characters torture each other, kind of,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
that was his thing.
Yeah.
And so it certainly seems like as I said on the other my podcast, don't want to get us into any liability or libel here, but it certainly seems like she acted out some of her father's characters in her relationship, not just with Bourdain, but she has just an interesting approach to relationships. And she didn't have a good upbringing, not to blame everything on nurture, but
right,
her father would read these scripts for his horror slasher movies to her as bedtime stories when she was a little kid. And she said that the reason she got into acting was that was the only way to get his attention. He was more a director. He was the director, not a father.
Yeah. No, I just think that somebody coming from the right, as I think we can say we both are now, having that type of cultural insight is so rare. I mean, it's because we're so used to the right wing being grillers, right? It's the grill class. So, you having knowledge about early Argento films and being able to put that through the lens of what's happening with them too, I think it was just so refreshing because I've had those same thoughts about what happened with Bourdain in the end of his life. And you can't really make those critiques in the mainstream because it's too, he was basically destroyed by a woman, right? I mean,
Right.
he destroyed himself for sure.
Yes.
He let it happen, and I think he was like acting out his own play, which you kind of say. But still, being able to see with that level of cultural analysis from our perspective, this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, because that's the type of lens we need to see this stuff through. And it's just great that you're doing it. So
Yeah, I think there's been a tendency to just retreat from culture on the
yeah,
right. It
yes,
was
yes.
something we gave up on a lot, and you've got to engage with it. You can't really create your own alternate culture. We've got to become the new counterculture, but in order to be the new counterculture, we have to be able to know what we're talking about. We have to hit it head on instead of trying to create some parallel world, which I would love it. I've watched some right wing, explicitly right wing movies and things like that, and it, we have a tendency to try to bash each other on the head. There was a movie I watched a year or so ago, and I forget who made it, but it was about this father and son reconciling. The son was like, I think, an advertising a superstar who had a severe alcohol problem, and it gets to the end and he finds his religion and he
Yeah,
repairs his relationship with his father, but it was like being hit with a hammer.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
just like
yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, a lot of these Christian movies, like I saw American Underdog because I'm a huge Rams fan, the Kurt Warner story. I
yeah.
saw that in the theaters, and it's like, I appreciate the values, and I obviously love seeing Kurt Warner's story, but it's just too right. It's not cool. Have you seen Craig Zoller's films at all? Like, have you seen Dragged Across Concrete or Bone Tomahawk?
No, I have to check those out.
I'm still amazed that everybody has not watched these movies. He is like a based film director. He comes from the kind of like horror side, and his movies are super like contemporary right wing, like reactionary, and they're so good. Mel Gibson, Vince Vaughn in Dragged Across Concrete, they play cops. It is so good, and I can't believe everybody hasn't seen it. I tell everyone, and no one. It's like he's under wraps for some reason.
Yeah, I have to check those out. Especially, I mean, Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn.
I know. It's insane. But no, I think you're totally right in general that we need to wade more into culture than we are. So you said something that I actually want to ask you about. You said that we need to be the counterculture. Do you think that the right formerly was the mainstream culture and then we haven't been, or like what do you think?
So I do, and it's been a long time since the right was truly in charge. Starting in the '60s, we really just abandoned everything. It's like, oh, we don't need the universities. We don't need entertainment. Not that entertainment was a bastion of conservatism before then. And as we ceded ground, the left began taking more ground, and they're in power. Now, when you see like Rage Against the Machine, like basically advocating for the state, you know, they're in charge now, and they refuse to admit it. But you look at government, the FBI and all these places that you would assume would be full of right-wing nut jobs, and they're not. They are the power, they're the regime, as people say. And the right has kind of been knocked out. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce, not that the chamber is the coolest thing in the world, but like that used to be ours. And now the chamber is worried about, equity and
Right.
climate change and
Yeah.
whatnot. And it's just we gave up so much ground. I think that and so much institutional power. We're on the outside right now, but you know, our ideas make a lot more sense for civilizational progress. As much as the progressives love to talk about progress, a lot of their ideas are regressive. So I think it's time for the right to like step up and embrace that and realize that we're not in charge.
So what do you say to the sort of mold bug perspective? I don't know if you've read Curtis Yarvin at all or, gotten into that whole thing. But his perspective and that I think the neo-reactionary perspective is that actually, what do they say? What we refer to as conservatism today is actually classical liberalism.
Yes.
And that when we say a conservative today, actually it's always been a reaction, and that America's always been this sort of marching progressive parade going further and further left and killing more and more dragons on the right. Um, and really, that's been the dominant force in American society for centuries. And what we refer to as right wing is actually a reaction to that.
I would, there's a lot of truth to that because I think was it Orrin McIntyre on Twitter is like,
Yeah,
you know, the
he's great.
side who
He's
just
really
wants to be
cool.
left alone is always going to lose to the side who wants to do something. You know, you can't just be left alone. And Michael Malice has a good line about conservatism, especially today. Is just conservatism is I think I forget exactly how he phrased that. That conservatism is just liberalism driving the speed limits.
Yeah, conservative. Yeah, right. That's the classical liberal argument,
Yeah,
saying that basically, like, all these ideas that we have of conservative are actually not really conservative ideas traditionally. It's just,
no.
you know. Um. So, what has your experiences been in the world of marketing? Because I don't know if you want to dox where you live, but like you have there's a certain very large company in
Yeah.
your milieu. So I just want to know like what you've seen as somebody who's making marketing materials and how, you know, what's your story there?
So I'll dox myself. It's not something I've done a real good job of keeping secret. So I live in Northwest Arkansas, which is the home of Walmart. And Walmart was a very reactionary company when it started. You know, they did everything differently. And as they've gotten big, there's been a pull within leadership and, you know, maybe the family to, they want to be liked. Whereas Sam Walton, the founder, and the early guys, they really reveled in being, you know, perceived as these hicks in Arkansas who were building this huge company, and they just did their own thing. They liked being the outsiders. And as more people have been recruited in from the coast and traditional businesses, uh, pulling in people from Target or wherever, there's been this more of a desire to be seen as mainstream. So rather than being outside, and so it's interesting to watch this company that was founded on the idea of being a maverick to instead want to be liked, and just the pull towards every it's like Twitter is ruling some of their decisions, you know, and it's always so ham-fisted. They got dragged a lot during Black History Month because what they released like a Juneteenth ice cream and something else, and it's also huge, you know, and you have different departments. One person just manages to make this decision without running it by this other, you know, the comms team, and then the comms team is like, "What have you done to us?" And it's very much not what people would expect. I think people think of Walmart as this like super like conservative Christian place, and it's, you know, having been on the inside, I worked for a firm that serviced market Walmart, and there was a lot. You would sit in these meetings, and there's just like this assumption, you know, people would just start going off bashing Trump or whatever, and there's just this assumption that everyone in the room agrees with all these positions. I mean, even on huge conference calls, you'll have people just like making these broad statements about, you know, the other side, and, you know, how they're, you know, how ignorant they are. And it's like, y'all are talking about your customers and also a whole lot of your store employees right now.
It's just so insane because I think the common person imagines that agree and amplify cycle of liberalism is happening in like cool Silicon Valley companies. But the fact that that's going on in Walmart, it's just
Yes.
so crazy because you would think it's Walmart. It's like, you know, like how are you going to just make that assumption? What we're talking about, just to clarify for the listeners, because I think that many people haven't experienced this before. When you work in mainstream marketing, particularly in today's world, is a very gynocratic field because it's pretty much women. I think there's more women in marketing than men, actually, by a lot. And it's also a field where everybody's extremely liberal. And so, because I don't really know why that is. I guess it's because it's kind of like a do nothing field. You know what I mean? It's like anybody can do it. It's a soft skill, right? It's soft. You don't actually have to be actually good at anything, you know, to do
Right.
it. So there's a lot of very useless people in it. And they do this thing, and I've experienced this in LA, but it's crazy to me that this is happening in Arkansas for Walmart. They do this thing where you get in the room and they say, it's like a lure or like a test. They say something liberal, and then they kind of wait for you to say something back.
Right. Oh yes, you're right. And not only are you right, you're underselling it. The agree and amplify. You gotta and it hasn't gotten to the point in Arkansas at Walmart where you're gonna get cast out if you don't agree and amplify. You can still just kind of go stone faced and just sit quietly. And if enough people in the room sit quietly, then the whoever's leading the meeting or whatever will kind of realize and move on. But then it will happen again because it's the whole the idea of bubbles, and people get caught in their bubbles, and they forget that there are people who are different than they are, who think differently than they are, who have different values than they do. And it's always shocking to them to be reminded that we're out there.
Yeah, and it's what's also just so funny that it's happening so intensely in marketing, because the premise of marketing is supposed to be appealing to your customer. Yet at the same time, it's the job of propaganda. So I think you have a lot of people. I've never met so many hardcore socialists than in advertising, because it's a lot of rich kids, one, and then two, who are naturally drawn to socialism and like bourgeois, whatever. But beyond that, it's also like, I think everybody gets into this industry because we like expression. We like the power of messaging. We know those things. So even if you are a leftist, that starts to kind of crawl into your marketing, your ideas. And, but it's a perfect irony, because your job is to be speaking in a way that's actually not divisive.
And I think that comes back to the whole agree and amplify. And you had I think it might have been your actual first Substack piece, the one where you're talking about how the Nike swoosh wasn't made, in this focus group or whatever. It was just kind of oh crap, we need a logo and this is the best one. And there was this power in people just kind of coming up with their own ideas and going out and doing things. And now there's this weird fear of failure. Like, my theory on the way that modern businesses operate, where everything's done by committee, is that when things go wrong, there's no one to blame. It's
Yeah, it's
whose fault
CYA,
is this? It's
right?
well,
Yeah,
me and 75 other people, we did this.
yeah.
But the joke I heard from a marketer who I think was good at one time and kind of got caught in the decade when he was most successful was, zebra is a horse designed by committee.
Right.
And also there's this tendency to chase success. Like, I've had a joke rolling around in my head recently where it's like, I don't think there really are content creators in the world. They're like 3 virtual assistants in the Philippines creating content that then gets copied across the world. Looking at Instagram especially, you'll see where all these people, especially now that Instagram is serving up so much stuff besides what you intentionally want to see, it's serving up all these suggestions, and you see all these same jokes over and over again, where
Yeah,
all these different people, these wannabe influencers, are just copying one another verbatim.
yeah.
And it's almost seen as fun at this point rather than unoriginal, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, well, have you done TikTok at all?
So, it's a weird line that I've drawn on TikTok.
Yeah.
But even though I'm being data mined mercilessly by everything I use, I've that's been my breaking point. It's I'm not ready to give into TikTok.
To give it to the Chinese government, which is totally what that is. No, you're completely right. That's good to do. But that sort of mimetic copying that comes from TikTok. So TikTok, and that's what Instagram is, just copying them. And I mean, I kind of love it, to be honest, because it's better to me to see that than see these horrible phony Instagram pictures of like girls' butts. I would rather people be like doing funny takes on the same joke over and over again.
Yeah,
It's almost like a little more wholesome. And also the thing that I always say about TikTok is Saturday Night Live is dead, right? So what
right.
happened to great sketch comedy? It's all on TikTok. Like there is the funniest people in the world on there, and they are so funny.
See, I
So
rely on people on Instagram to then
yeah,
post
to
it
then
to the
repost.
TikTok.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, so then how have you managed to survive this long in marketing as a dissident thinker? Or what was your, did you start out more left, or have you always been kind of right?
I've always been kind of right. My dad was a union man who voted Reagan, and he was arguing with his union members. It's like, you're voting for people who are going to take more of our money, and the union, it was mandatory for him to be a member of working. He worked at a railroad. And he's like, our leadership is taking our money and using it for causes that run against our best interest. And so I never really rebelled uh, against my parents and became a full on like leftist. I probably was a little more left in college, but I was drawn more to the Libertarian Party. And then I had my Ayn Rand phase, and then kind of drifted back more toward, after having kids, especially, drifted back away from uh, the extremes, particularly of libertarianism. Like, to me, libertarianism is like communism. Like, it's a great idea in theory. The problem is, once you add people into the mix, it doesn't work quite as well anymore. And there just have to be guardrails. I've become a bigger fan of I don't want to say big government. Like, I would prefer government to be as small as possible, but in this moment it doesn't seem that that is possible, because there's so much institutional power in these big companies who want to thwart the will of the people. It's like, oh well, you don't believe in the Paris Accord for climate change, so we're just going to force this through, or we're going to do ESG investing, or whatever it is. So, I just politically, to kind of, I guess, sum it up, I've kind of drifted back into, I'm a big fan of Ron DeSantis right now. Just like, what? I was going to leave you alone, but you wanted to start this fight. I'm going to have this fight. I'm not just going to say, oh, well, I'm conservative, I'm a Republican, I like business. It's like, no, I like business, but there are rules here.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I dig it. Yeah, that's like coming at this from the libertarian perspective. I'm a DeSantis guy too. A lot of Trump people and a lot of people in the kind of dissident right sphere on Twitter are very suspicious of DeSantis. They're worried that he makes a little bit too much sense, and that he's going to get in there and turn out to just be a dud, and he's going to play by the rules too much and everything like that. So if it's Trump and DeSantis, are you more of a DeSantis guy or more of a Trump guy?
So at this point, I'm more of a DeSantis guy. I think Trump did a tremendous job for the most part. I do think the criticisms about him getting kind of rolled by Fauci and Birx, and to an extent the deep state that he said he was going to fight.
Right.
Uh, but then from a tactical perspective, I I'm afraid that he's alienated so many of the professionals needed to run an administration that it would be tough for him to staff uh, if he were elected again in 2024. Now, if the choice is between him, Trump, and anyone else,
Yeah, definitely going with
I'm 100%. But if we're talking a
yeah,
primary here,
yeah.
and also just from an age thing, I'm a Gen X guy, and DeSantis is not. He's younger, but I'm tired of old people
Yeah, yeah,
running
no, you're
government.
right. I think that's I definitely dig that. I actually kind of agree with you. I mean, it's like I voted for Trump in 2016, and it was such a big commitment to do that. As I always say, I lost like all my friends and family, or much of it, and became like a total pariah. Whereas before I was an Obama guy, I was like, I remember the night Obama was elected, I was young, I was like 20 something, living in Manhattan with my like ultra diverse group of friends, and they were all crying. And I was like really happy that Obama had defeated, who did he defeat in the first one? I don't even, was it
McCain?
McCain? Was that the first one or the second one? Can't even remember. It was Palin was the second time around.
No, it was fair because it was McCain, Palin,
Yeah.
and then it was Romney Ryan.
Then it was Romney Ryan. Okay. So yeah. And I was so, God, I was so dumb. I was like, we were all dumb though. Like we still believed that the president was like a really powerful position. We're still living in this old paradigm, and it was like, oh, we defeated these horrible neocons that brought us into Iraq. And, I was so excited. And then slowly but surely, you started to see what was really going on leading up to 2016. And you're starting to be like, well, wait a second, like what's actually happening here? Who actually has the power? And, I think the whole Occupy Wall Street, and then you saw what happened with the left. The left went from protesting things like the WTO, from protesting globalist, G7 forces, etc., to 100% obsessed with identity all the time. And that happened right after Occupy Wall Street. And it was almost like, oh, they figured out the perfect way to just kill that entire thing, and they did it and it worked. So then I started to, then of course you get red pilled. I started reading Moldbug and stuff and seeing this from a very different perspective and just understanding that really I was a right-wing person all along. And then I voted for Trump and completely, I had traveled throughout the Rust Belt for a Vice story that never got published right before Trump. And I could see that something was going to happen because it was all destroyed and everything. And I really went for Trump. And it's like, I feel like I kind of like abandoning Trump now feels like wrong. But in my heart of hearts, I actually really agree with you. Like, I think that Desantis is a much better choice. And he's young. He's an operator. He's got the relationships. And so many of our opposition are voting emotionally. Yes. He doesn't emotionally trigger people, which is actually a huge benefit because then it's like they're not just like blind raging so much, I think, which I think helps us actually.
Yeah, and Youngkin in Virginia to an extent, although he's following the playbook, and none of these things would be possible without Trump. And on our side, there can be an emotional attachment to Trump. You talked about feeling like you're abandoning him, and it's like, no, like we can be thankful for everything he did, but we can't have a movement wrapped around one. What is he, 78 now? Year old man, like. We've got to be thankful and see those ideas, tweaked and put into practice by other people and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we risk going back to kind of the status quo that we had before that got us to where we are now.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think the concern, the worry is that, DeSantis is just too rational, and it's like he's not gonna be able to do the base, the stuff that really needs to be done. And I think, but I don't agree with that. I mean, from what I see, I think he's totally our guy. And I'm definitely, how about a DeSantis Trump, and then he could just tweet all day. Doesn't actually have to do anything. Trump.
And he might be coming back, with the Musk Twitter deal back in from what I understand, the whole reason that Twitter is now balking is they want to make sure that he's got the debt financing available to go through with the purchase. But Trump gets reinstated, I do not believe his pledge to stay on from Twitter.
Okay, so let's talk about shifting topics a little bit. One article that you wrote that really struck me and this is a little bit transitional into what we're already talking about, is we have on the right, there's this whole group of anon posters who really think that you can't come out as a conservative if you're a, as the word for it is face fag. But like if you're like, I'm a face fag, right? Which people know my face, like, what I'm saying. But that's actually frowned upon by certain people because they view us as like more normie, like we can't really say what we mean, we can't really, all this stuff. But you had an article that immediately struck me called "Why You Should Out Yourself as a Conservative," and you have this great moment in here, and I just want to read it, where you're out at dinner with people and you say, while we'd interacted a handful of times, we'd never hung out as adults. It had always been as parents, which meant our impromptu gathering involved normal getting to know you pleasantries. When it was my turn to answer the question about what I do, I thought for a moment and admitted I'm currently between things when it comes to daytime employment, adding, plus I'm publicly a right-wing nut job, which likely doesn't help me in the current climate. Nor was I canceled, so they don't say anything bad, and you say, I wasn't canceled. Instead, it was this: if I'd just given the secret handshake, I'd spoken the password, I'd unlocked the message with my little orphan Annie decoder ring. Turns out, despite assumptions, and we all know the thing about assumptions, we were in the trust tree, able to speak freely, and we did until we returned to the facility just in time to retrieve our kids. So this is a moment that I go through all the time. I was just in Chicago. I went through this exact same thing with my cousin's friends who are all like these lawyers, and you just expect, you can't say anything about it, but then you drop a little line and then it turns out, oh yeah, we're on the same page.
And so there's this, coming from the corporate world, and, we've spoken before and you mentioned, that they agree and amplify. And there's this assumption on our part that we're surrounded by hostile forces. And I think we need to get over that fear and realize that, especially now, what we're talking about is not radical. Like saying, like, hey, I don't, want a dude in the locker room with my daughters. Hey, I don't think that, my kid should have to wear a mask for a virus that she's not really at risk from. And, or we need to stop spending money, or whatever the case
right.
Like the other side, or even though I mentioned earlier the counterculture thing, I mean, it's almost like we are a counterculture for normal thought, but we're so inundated with these messages, whether it's advertising campaigns. Adidas had a huge one 6 months or so ago with the trans athlete. I think it aired during the Super Bowl, actually. And we see this stuff, and we assume that we're on the outside, and probably especially you being, in California, or when you're visiting people in Chicago, but we're not. Like, there are a lot of people who are over it. They're like, it's one thing when it was Obama, first black president.
Yeah, right.
And like he said the quiet part out loud about gay marriage, or what his feelings on gay marriage. That was one thing. That wasn't as much of a seismic shift as where we've gotten to. The whole slippery slope fallacy has been proven to not be a fallacy. It's not a slippery slope. It's like an oiled up bobsled jump. And we're going down it at breakneck speed, and people are tired of it. And we have to come out, and to your point, we do have to show our faces. And I respect people who want anonymity and who are concerned, but the issue with that is the more that we hide behind, avatars or whatever, the fewer people who are willing to join us. Whereas when they see you at, as another parent at soccer practice, or going to church or whatever, well, I guess church isn't the best example, although churches have gotten pretty crazy too.
Yeah. You got to say what you said about that after this, but yeah.
It's important to let people know that we're not alone, and so while anonymity does very much serve a purpose, look at the founding of America. You had a bunch of shit posters sending out pamphlets under pseudonyms. So I respect it, but I just think it's time for us to not be afraid, because you can't cancel everyone.
Wait, is that true about founding father? Like, who was Anon posting in those days?
I'm riffing on something I got from was it Antonio Garcia Martinez? Who was it? I'm gonna have to look at, but like the Federalist Papers and things like that.
Yeah.
what name did they? So that was Hamilton, and yeah, so Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison, Publius. So they shared. So they all shared so they weren't really shit posting, but
Yeah. Oh,
but it's more fun to say it that way. But
yeah. Enlightenment shit posting. So, but they were not. What was Publius?
So that was the group handle. So the Federalist Papers, they didn't use their real name because this was kind of a radical thought at the time, ahead of the revolution, and so or not ahead, but they had so they published the papers, the newsletters, the pamphlets that they passed out under this name of Publius instead of using their real name. But then obviously they came out of the shadows at some point.
Yeah, right. Okay. So they were anonymous, right? And then but then eventually they came out. Yeah. Um to me it's funny because I've always struggled with this, yeah, and it's trying to hide yourself and hide your career, and how much do you get into this? I think the way that they really control you is by saying, "Oh, well, just don't talk about it, just don't talk about politics." It's why would you bring it up? Why nobody wants to talk about this anyway. Since I've like abandoned that and just been like, I'm out, like I'm out, as you said, come out as a conservative. Like I'm totally out now. I'm like not before I kind of had layers of hiding. I'm just so much happier. And the people that I'm interacting with on a daily basis, it's like I feel like the way that we deal with friendship in today's world, I'm thinking about this a lot, is we have this notion that like you're supposed to have this group of friends that are just agnostic of politics, that these are your close friends and you're just supposed to like watch football and have beers and stuff. And I have those people, right? And it's not that I don't like that, but I do find that the more I limit people who are woke or who aren't aligned with what we're doing in my life, the happier I am. The more I come out as like really believing what I believe, the better off I seem to be, and the more purposeful I feel.
Yes. And I agree with you. It's important to have, my best bud is a Democratic
Yeah,
voter.
sure.
But at the same time, he's not super dedicated, especially to the modern incarnation. And also, this is where you'll find alignment with other people. Whereas when you get beyond the political label and get into the actual ideas, uh, you know, a lot of people are just tired of the messaging. Like, I was around a more liberal guy during Pride Month, and it's just like pride, and he's just like, I'm done with. Why does everything have to be about pride? Like,
Yeah.
Your pride cereal and your pride, cupcake, and it's just like, okay, we get it. Like, and so I think that there's a weariness amongst the kind of normal middle, even those who would traditionally vote left. That's another value in coming out, is even though they may have been like you and voted for Obama or whatever, like, and even if they're still voting Democratic, they're just like, guys, come on, like, can we get away from this like fringe, like 1% of the population issues, and get into like normal stuff?
So why do you think that fringe 1% has managed to just gain so much power, at least over the systems of propaganda?
So we have a very well we've developed this idea that like being judgmental or critical is like the worst thing in the world. And like, it's almost like it would be better to be like a tolerant serial killer than it would be to admit that you have an opinion that runs against these fringes. And our side, especially, we get caught up in being polite, even though, we could be getting hit in the face and we don't want to hit back. And also, I think there's a lot of just, people chasing one another with this desire to outdo, to show your tolerance. Like, And I do not think that tolerance is as important. And now I do think that normal tolerance in normal times, but tolerance of like insanity, no. Like, people who have no knowledge of religion love to bring up Jesus. And, Jesus hung out with prostitutes. Well, yeah, but he didn't say keep doing it. He said, he was like, hey, there's a better way. I want to help you live a better life. And when it comes to this whole notion of tolerance that's infected everything, and I think really comes up in the marketing world, it that you can show people love and compassion, but still, say, hey, you need to change some things about what you're doing.
There's a great quote in like Kabbalistic Judaism that's don't relish in the what's allowed. So that's like kind of what you're saying. It's like just because Jesus wasn't like let's kill prostitutes doesn't mean that therefore everybody should be a prostitute.
Yes.
It's like they're mixing things up. Like they're saying, oh well, we can be gay, so therefore let's make everything about being gay all the time because like we need to, and that's not, yeah, that's really a mistaken perspective. But so it sounds like what you're saying is it's a battle of attrition, and the people who are more right-minded just haven't really been up for the fight with the people who have.
Yeah, that's a much more succinct way of saying what I was rambling around there. That and it sometimes it seems like we think if we just chill, the moment will pass. And to an extent, I almost agree with that because I'm not a national divorce guy. I don't want Civil War II. Like, I'm not ready to give up on America. And the pendulum does swing, but sometimes we need to be more active in pulling the pendulum back rather than just waiting for it to happen.
Exactly. So, and that's I think that's the mistaken belief. And I hear people saying this all the time. Oren McIntyre says this also, who's great, and I really like his stuff. But he's like, oh well, yeah. It seems to be a lot of times he's saying like there's really not much to do besides wait. But I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I don't think that we can wait. I don't think that's because that's how we got here. We got here because we were waiting. I mean, it's like at a certain point, people really need to start coming out much more forcefully against this stuff because it's so bad and it's so wrong. And it's like, you literally have the health secretary of the entire nation. People are always like, oh, why do you care? It doesn't affect you. It doesn't really affect your life. I'm like, literally, you have a man dressed up as a woman who is the health secretary of the entire country, of the nation, who's up there saying, give your kids hormones, trans hormones. It's like, that's straight up child abuse on a massive, it's like, it's so evil that you can't even wrap your mind around it. So it's like people just think, oh, well, if we wait around long enough, it'll go away. It's like, no. It's not going to just go away. Like you have to actually fight it.
It's crazy to me that in 2022, we've decided that, it's important as a society, a progressive, advanced society to embrace genital mutilation in children.
Just so insane. And it's so wrong. And it's like, oh God. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
And when people ask, like, just to this, why do I care? It's, like the reason I care about politics or policy or any of this, I do care about people. I want a flourishing, healthy society. I want the world my children inhabit when they grow up to be a good place. Like, I don't want to like move off the grid and like go become not a Unabomber, but live a Unabomber style life just off the grid, writing manifestos. Like, I care about society. And I think that that's something that people assume our side, oh, we just hate everybody. We're phobic. Everything is a phobia. And it's like, no, like maybe we actually love people and see the harm that a lot of these ideas are causing to them.
Yeah, right. Are you willing to talk about some of your own? I know we both have kids. Are you willing to talk about some of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So like I have a daughter. I know you have a daughter. And that's what scares me the most. I'm just so scared that, like in Canada, somebody's gonna, oh, she's gonna say one day, I feel like a boy. And then somebody's gonna be like, oh, you need to have lifelong surgery. Let's get you on pills for the rest of your life. And if you are disagree with that, Dad, you're going to jail. Like that's what I'm worried about.
So, a buddy of mine who we had a similar journey over from more pure libertarianism to where we are now years ago, before DeSantis or Abbott in Texas or anybody was talking about this. He was saying we need a parental bill of rights because this is what's coming. He's like, we're going to get to a point where our children are going to be able to be taken from us for us having wrong thoughts. And at that time, you know, 10 years ago or whatever, it's like, no. But now I realize what a visionary he was. And this is one benefit. I've complained about, the wokeification of corporate America, even in Arkansas, but it is one benefit of where I live is we don't have parents here jockeying to out tolerate one another using their kids as examples. And my kids go to a school that would not tolerate that at all. So that's helpful for me to just have the peace of mind knowing that like they're not going to school and going into the gender closet and coming out in a different set of clothing with a different name for the day that then change before I pick them up in the afternoon. Whereas, in more blue places, it is very much a concern. And it is also something I've got. My oldest is about to turn 15. And of course, she's rebelling against mom and dad to an extent. And so she's a lot more tolerant of this stuff. And, we've had some like screaming arguments about.
So where is she receiving? Because it seems like she's not getting it at school, at least, which thank God. But where is she receiving this like pro-trans messaging from? Do you think
The internet?
just
And,
right? Yeah,
and a lot of this comes from my own upbringing. I was not sheltered at all. And not that my parents were like taking me to like drag shows or anything like that, but like I was allowed to watch movies and read books and I didn't have to smuggle anything in. And some of it was probably age inappropriate. I think I read Stephen King's It when I was in like the 7th grade.
Oh yeah, so did I.
And
that same age.
I've taken my general position just on fatherhood is they're going to go out into the world. And it is my job to protect them. But when it comes to ideas, they're going to encounter them. So I would rather be an open thing where we can actually have those fights rather than push it underground. And, the same with like, I know my daughters are going to date. So like, yes, I know you're growing, you're starting to develop feelings towards boys. Like that's okay. I guess my fear is, or the way I do it is to try to not drive them away. I would rather let them go through, being young and stupid and have me as a sounding board than try to completely cloister them from these ideas.
Right. Yeah, right.
And it's just so pervasive everywhere, like, I mean, even in Pixar movies and stuff now, or, you're starting to see these little flashes. There was what was it? The Big Hero 6 short or something recently that, or the show where Big Hero 6 was helping some woman who was on her period and he goes to the store to buy tampons.
Yeah.
And this like person in like with the like trans flag shirt on who like looks like a boy was like, oh, well, for menstruating people, here's the product you need.
God, man. The whole movie Red Panda is about like a girl getting her period, I think.
Yeah.
Like that's a whole metaphor for that, which is like, yeah, that's fine. But no, also it's sorry, no, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, just real quick and I'll let you go.
No.
I also noticed that stuff is backfiring because it's cool. And so the kids don't want to agree with the adults. And so some of this stuff it's not working. Like my oldest watched some episodes of She-Hulk and she was like, what is this supposed to be?
It sucks. Well, also there's that character. Yeah, you're seeing it really creeping into the Disney stuff. There's that I was struck by the character in the new Toy Story named Spoonie. So there's a character named Spoonie in the new Toy Story 4, like, or 5 or whatever, that it's a spoon that's like barely a toy, but it's like a spoon that the little girl has kind of like put stickers on and put a pipe cleaner on, and it comes alive as a toy. And I really thought it was a tell that on the foot of Spoonie there's a rainbow. And it's like he's kind of like, it's a he, she, you can't really tell like what it is. And it's also like almost like it's almost a metaphor for these identities that they want to sell you. It's like you can become a real thing if you subscribe to our identity. Like we'll take you from nothing into like being real, you know, like we're making trans people real. And they're these kind of like broken toys, but with us, you know, if you join the globalist regime, we can transform you into a real thing. So you do see it coming in there.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's, you know, and my kid, she has TikTok, so I'm sure that, but it's there, we do have a lot of policies around electronics where, you know, like complete, just don't expect privacy. Like,
Yeah.
so even though I said I'm not a big gatekeeper, it's different now because you don't have to go to the library or, you know, borrow a copy of a book or whatever, you know, find somebody's like uh parents' password to the
Yeah.
satellite dish or whatever. Like,
Like we had to do, right? So how do you argue against this stuff? That because this is just such a like triggering fear that I think so many of us have, which is like, you know, what is more scary than you wanting to raise your kids in a certain way and this evil regime like having access to their brain and you know, selling them these horrible ideas that are so damaging, and you're like helpless to stop it, you know, it's just such a so how do you press against, how do you propagandize against these things that they're receiving?
you know, it's funny that I think some of the best defense is using their own language. Like my favorite, you know, two-word phrase is you know, her penis.
That's just really funny.
And you know, it's just so absurd on so many levels. And people know it's absurd, but because we want to be polite, we want to be tolerant, we you know, we agree and amplify, or we just quietly nod our heads, but like it's just obvious. And it's funny, I'm starting to think that like, you know, there's going to be I could envision, you know, you already see on Twitter, you know, you see the TERF fights, the trans exclusionary
Yeah.
radical feminist. That hasn't really seeped over into the real world. If you say TERF to a normal person, they're going to say what? But I think there's a possibility of weird alignments moving forward, which I think is something that Trump did a good job of finding these different people to bring together. And so I could see a world where like conservatives and lesbians team up and like against this like radical gender thing, because while I'm not one that's super worried about you know, misogyny, uh at least the way most people are worried about it, as a father of daughters, it is concerning to me that the modern movement is really trying to erase women. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my glib take on it is the patriarchy always wins, because you know, every woman of the year is now a man.
Every single
But
one. Yeah,
it's but
so
the
funny.
like
So
this whole
why did
thing.
they do that though? Wait, like where is this coming from even? It's the reason it's so effective is it's so bewildering. Like where do they get this shit from? And why are they putting it forward? Like who is doing this to us?
I am increasingly of the opinion, you know, the old journalistic adage, follow the money. You know,
Yeah.
recently libs of TikTok found the Vanderbilt
Yes.
woman
Yeah.
at Vanderbilt who was arguing in favor of really expanding their gender affirming care, not for any, you know, noble reasons, at least people, the proponents would claim is noble, but for purely financial reasons. And I forget the name of the family, and I'm not going to try to Google this right now, but there is a family of billionaires who are very vocal about pushing trans rights and all this. And they also have a huge financial stake in some of the companies providing all these pharmaceuticals. And, you know, it's not just a surgery. It's not just a pill. You become a
It's a
lifelong
lifetime
patient.
patient. Yeah, it's a dependent identity. This is I've written a little bit about this. It's a all the and I think following the money, you're exactly right. It's like if you take each one of these issues to its core, you'll see that there's like a large amount of money to be made by, or it's freeing people from their funds. It's if they find ways to make you a subscriber to this ideology.
Which is something you've written a lot about.
Right.
I'm assuming anyone watching this has read the Rise of Consumer Nationalism,
Right.
and uh, it started in the '60s again. Not to trace everything back to the '60s, but the concept of identity has so overtaken everything. It's not just like, I'm a father and a husband and a marketer or whatever. It's I'm a cis white male, and
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, and which also drives a lot of this, but then it pulls people in because of this selling of identity. We're trying to find these virtual tribes rather than
Yeah.
just going out in our neighborhood and like talking to the people who actually live around us.
Yeah. No, so I think you're totally right. I mean, money is a huge part of it, and and I think that that's a big explanation for so much of the woke marketing too. It's like the customer is not the customer that it used to be. It used to be you sell widget to guy, and that was it. Like that was your job. Now it's so much more vague. Like as a company, you're better off trying to do some like public private partnership and like drink taxpayer money milkshake going like over the top than try and like sell a product to a person.
Right.
And on the lower level, you're better off trying to get a subscriber or somebody who's paying you for their trans pills every single month for their entire lives. Think about how valuable that customer is compared to just some, white dude who buys 5 major things a year, and that's the thing. Like women spend 80% of the money.
Right.
So yeah, it's like it's actually kind of makes sense to formulate yourself as these companies really into something that's not just selling products anymore. Sorry, speaking, you can hear my baby maybe crying, but cool. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit to your work with Coffee and Koshan. So what is that? What's it about, and who's your co-host, and why did you start that?
So it actually started. I was doing the website for Brad Jackson, who was the creator of the podcast, and his then co-host, but his co-host had to tap out, and a mutual friend, Ben Dominich, who used to be the publisher of the Federalist and who's now with the Spectator World, told Brad, he's like, well, just use Rich as your co-host. And Brad and Ben had a very successful podcast in the early days of podcasting called Coffee and Markets. And so Coffee and Kashon was kind of a riff on that original, but shifting more in a cultural direction where we talk about food, drink, football. We have politics come in, but it's not an overtly political show. And it's just been kind of an evolution over time. We started a little over a year ago, and it's just really to talk about things that we like. And you being a food guy,
Yeah.
Trying to remain intentional, I think, would be a big part of it. Like my big thing is I usually do a cocktail of the week, and there's no mixers. You're not going to go to the store and buy this. You're not going to get out your real lemon, little plastic bottle. You're going to cut up a real lemon, and just kind of return to letting people know that you can do this stuff. as we've gotten busy as a society, and then home ec courses have gone away and things like that, I think people have gotten afraid. Like they think they need to just go to the store and buy it ready to go. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you can make this at home yourself for
Yeah.
a lot easier than you think you could.
Yeah. It's a more increased dependence. You talk a lot about gin. I've noticed there's been a lot of gin episodes recently. You talk about the Queen's favorite cocktail.
So actually, it started off. I'm a big bourbon guy.
Yeah.
I was counting last night. I think I've got 30 different varieties in my house right now, and I'm not a big spender. Normally when you talk bourbon people, it's like, oh, well, I've got this bottle of Pappy that I paid $2,500 for.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's not me. But I had done a lot of gin or bourbon cocktails and a lot of bourbon stuff because I'm a bourbon guy, and there's a distillery down the street from me that makes gin, and so that's really where the gin came from. It's like, all right, I need to mix this up. I can't just be the bourbon guy.
Oh, okay. So that's why it's been shifting to gin. Yeah. Gin's having a moment where I just went to a Filipino gin bar in LA last night, and it was all these very fancy cocktails. I'm also a huge bourbon guy. What's your Willet?
I do know Willet.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Willet.
My first bourbon I really got into was Bland's.
Oh yeah, Bland's great. It's great. I actually really love Bland's too.
I do too, and it's one of those things that people kind of poo-poo. Once you get into it, it's like, oh, Bland's. It's like, oh, if it's so terrible, how come I can only buy bottles on the secondary market?
Yeah,
I can't just go to the store. But lately, I've gotten really into Elijah Craig Barrel Proof.
Oh, okay, I've seen that. I've seen that. Nice.
That's a good one. And then I for like a more affordable, I like Eagle Rare a lot. But I would love. I was excited when you said you went to a Filipino gin thing. Because I want the bourbon moment to go away, so that it's not this whole like quest to find a bottle.
Yeah.
Like, joining bourbon Facebook groups where like people are like, okay, at this store, they had 3 bottles of Weller Special Reserve. And this is probably all crazy to you because of where you live. But Arkansas has these Byzantine laws that I don't even understand that put us real low on the list for liquor distribution. And so things that people take for granted are like things that like are allocated here. So like I found a bottle of like Weller Special Reserve, which is, despite the name, it's like, limited edition or whatever. It's one of those terms that like everybody you give to like your cheapest. Right. And so I saw that there was a liquor store that right down the street from me that had 3 bottles of Weller Special Reserve. And I went and grabbed one. I said, is there a limit on this? He's like, yeah, you can only have one. He goes, I actually put these on the shelves yesterday, and you're the first person to buy one. And it was like, well, if I'm the first person, you should probably let me buy 2. But yeah, so I would love for people to start fighting over gin instead.
Yeah, I think it's gonna happen. I think it's coming. You're seeing it more and more. Gin everywhere. And I had a client in Indiana once, huge bourbon guy, and they were obsessed with Willet also. And they give you a map of the distillery, and you can buy where the barrel has been sitting. Because like, the barrel near the wall is actually like less expensive than the barrel near the middle, because the middle barrel is going to have like a slightly different taste and is going to be more like, I don't know, whatever. Which I found very crazy. Like it gets to that level.
Yeah, I have a buddy who's in a club where they'll buy a barrel, like the club barrel, of whatever.
Yeah, drink it right out of there. That's cool.
I think if you Pepsi challenge a lot of this, it's kind of like I was a server during the vodka craze, and you had people that were just so particular about which vodka they had. And
it's
vodka. There are definitely different grades, but it's one of those things. It's where marketing, the power of branding, comes in. Yeah, you build that loyalty.
So how have you seen food change recently? I mean, it's probably quite different in Arkansas than in other places, but I have found that writing about food, really like resonates with people recently, because I think that we're starting to see, like in Montana, in Bozeman, it was very striking how much the food had changed in only 6 years. It had gone from, you could still get a decent burger. There was still a few restaurants that were really like, that old West fresh food, but kind of like cowboy food, steak and potatoes kind of places with like elk steak. Whereas when I went to Bozeman this last time, it was all these restaurants that have names like, you know, charcoal and fire. And then you find out they're owned by a hedge fund, and it's like the same menu. It's like, chicken flatbread, but like Montana style, and it's like this kind of fake localism. So I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that where you are.
So we're in a very fortunate spot in that we're still in the ascent of the true localism, where there are a
Okay.
lot of restaurateurs who are focused on products they can get here in Arkansas, buying meat, we're buying cows or pigs or whatever from local ranches and, slaughtering them in-house. So we've actually got a surprisingly good food scene
It's like
here in
going well
Arkansas.
right now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it hasn't been. Now there is I won't, you know, uh, be that specific, but there is a local group uh run by some billionaires. So you probably guess, what their last name is. And they do fund a lot of their group has a lot of restaurants that really does focus on quality, but I think that one of the two who's involved in the money has bad taste because all their restaurants kind of end up being the same, where it's like, okay, I know the burger is going to be good, but anything else is
Anything
going to
else
be.
sucks, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it is a cool part about being in Arkansas is like I can go to somebody's like farm or house or whatever and like buy a chicken and
Yeah.
like I'm not butchering chickens. Like that's not something I've learned how to do, but like I can buy a chicken and that's already been dressed and like see the other chickens out in the backyard or
Wow.
whatever. So
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
but at the same time we are starting to see some of the shift towards the like more weird health conscious things. And then also the thing that really gets me about food right now is like a lot of other cultural things is the whole idea of appropriation, which I think is so stupid, just regardless of how you're applying it. But what was it? There was a huge controversy a couple of years ago where some college was celebrating multicultural week or something about Vietnam, and they served a banh mi, and people who didn't know what a banh mi was like, how in the hell are you going to serve a sandwich to honor Vietnamese people? And it's like, because that's what they ate, because all these people who ended up in Vietnam from other cultures brought their things and the Vietnamese people put their own spin on it. And that's how food works, that's how culture works, is people bring in bits and pieces from other places and appropriate them. Sorry, got off on a tangent
Yeah.
there, but
No. Yeah.
but
No. Yeah. There's a lot of that discussion here. It's like, oh, you can't serve this thing because, yeah, it's appropriating the authentic culture of some other thing. Yeah, that's funny. I think we're just seeing such a decline of elsewhere, probably not in Arkansas. We're seeing a decline in food quality for sure. And people have been tweeting about this. Like you're seeing like the restaurants that like just the quality of the chicken, like things are really declining in the big cities for sure. And in places like Bozeman, where it's like everything is a rainbow flag. There's great coffee. The coffee's at an all-time high because we're in like third wave coffee world still, and we can still get that. But like the meat quality is going down. Just the menus are really non-creative. There's nothing really local anymore. Which is what we're saying. But you might be protected.
well, and where we are on the other side here, your Bozeman article, I think I included this when I tweeted it out. There's a bar in Bentonville where Walmart is actually headquartered called the Dive Bar, and my buddy and I went in, and it's owned we assumed it was owned by the same conglomerate who has, when I don't know when cocktails all got to be $18 a
Oh my
piece, but
God. Yeah. And they're not even good. They all taste the exact same. They're not even like those expensive cocktails are not even good at all. I don't understand why anybody drinks them.
and yeah, and so we were like, well, where's the drink menu? And the bartender like looks at us and just sneers. We're a dive bar. And it's like no, you got a bunch of hipsters with like ear gauges and they're like street cycling gear sitting out on your patio. A
Yeah.
dive bar is where people who just got off third shift at the factory are drinking at 7
Right.
a.m.
Right.
So like I was in Chicago over the summer and went to you'll know the name of it. I've forgotten. There's a bar right next to Wrigley. It's a little or maybe you'll know, but like go in and I got a Chicago handshake at 11 o'clock in the morning. Which for those who don't know, Chicago handshake is a shot of Jepson's Malort, which is just a terrible, terrible liquor
It's
that
horrible.
advertises on how bad it is, and then a can of Old Style.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
And
Malort
like
shots.
so that's a dive bar. Like a dive bar is not a place where hipsters go to hang out. So that to me was a big sign of the shift that might come here to Arkansas, that similar to Bozeman, of where it goes from there used to be real dive bars, but now there's like
the dive bar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It used to be like, this is a Montana barbecue place that was actually Montana barbecue. Now it's like, yeah, charcoal, smoke, and spices. And it's like they always have these and titles, they're very
Yeah.
vague. And it's like authentic Montana barbecue. And then you eat it, and it's like, this is clearly like frozen brisket you flew in from somewhere. And then you look into it, it's like, oh, this is a part of a real estate investment trust that bought the entire block. And and people I think are realizing like, oh, I'm being sold localism that's not localism.
Yeah.
Um,
Localism as a brand.
localism as local, eat, drink local. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, so before wrapping up here, let's just talk a little bit more about you say that let's talk about two more things. One thing, I think that you're kind of like an optimist. You've said that America still has a future. You also have a great quote that the future isn't female, the present is female. So where you seem optimistic about the future. Where do you think that we're headed in the next decade or so?
So it starts with the present being female. So, that's just a marketing slogan, but you look at who's getting the majority of college degrees, who is getting jobs now, who's getting more preferential treatment in the world. And in a lot of ways, it's women. And I don't think that it's done from a place of goodness. I think that women are more dedicated to their jobs than men are in general.
Yeah, I think so too.
There's a more cooperative nature, less willingness to rock the boat. And so they make good employees. They make good cogs. Back in the days when men were the sole breadwinners, and, you would have men who just never saw their children, who just like worked and provided. And they did it because they had to. But then there was still more of a balance. Not everyone was like that. You would have the dad who would go to work and, clock in, clock out, come home. He would have time. He would maybe be tired. But he wouldn't necessarily make his job his identity. Now, granted, there are always people who are going to say, well, I am VP of this, and that's going to be how they define themselves. But with women, it just, they're much more willing to really go in and make work their family.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
But they're still, in declining numbers, but people are still having kids and they're still having families. And women's happiness is at the lowest it's ever been since we started tracking these things. And now self-described happiness indices, I mean, how do you define it?
Right.
And so I don't know how valuable they are, but given the women's revolution and breaking the glass ceilings and this and that, it doesn't seem that any of them are really happy with it.
Well, what are they? It's like 60% of urban white women are on antidepressants or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, are they, yeah, is this actually making them happier? And I think we have, I mean, maybe you saw that, did in your like growing up life, your friends or your family or anything, did you see like dissatisfied women at home who were bored and suicidal because the dad was away and they were just stuck and they couldn't do anything and nobody took them seriously?
No, I didn't. And I knew a lot of like stay-at-home moms. My own mom stayed at home for a majority of my life until just financially she had to go back to work. But my little sister and I were a little older when this happened. We were both already in school, and she was still able to, you know, be mom in a lot. She had very flexible jobs that didn't demand she, work until midnight or whatever. And so now we've shifted to where women are more doing the, working to midnight and things like that. And, my wife has a very demanding corporate job. And one reason that gives me hope is like the daughters are like, I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't want that at all. Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that, one reason I'm optimistic is, the pendulum, and always going back to the pendulum. So you've seen like women really come in and dominate and prove that they can be the CEO and prove that they can do it. And I'm not going to, I'm not here to like be like, oh, they're all failures. And, a lot of them work hard. A lot of them are very successful. They're good at what they do. But is it what they truly want to do, or is it what someone convinced them that they
Yeah,
wanted to
well,
do?
right, and they sold them just like how Bernays sold cigarettes to women as like a mark of liberty. It's like,
Yes.
oh, give your whole entire life to Salesforce, and they'll pay you, okay, and that'll be it. That'll be your whole life, and you're supposed, and then Salesforce then has access to twice as many workers, so they can pay everybody way cheaper, and it's like. But oh, that's a big win for you that you gave. What man would be like, oh, I made it to VP at Salesforce,
Yeah.
like whereas a woman is supposed to feel really accomplished because they beat, they beat the patriarchy to do that. But then they get there and they're like, oh, I have a
Yeah.
shitty corporate job just like everybody else. This sucks. This isn't like great, it's
Yeah.
really shitty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I hope you're right that more women are seeing that. I think in terms of America still having a future, I think I hope it does. You see a lot of people really cynical about this, and a lot of people being a little bit hyperbolic. um the difference though is women. Like every other society in history that has failed or survived, or almost every single other one, did not have this amount of women in positions of power.
Right.
Like we have more women now who, as you were saying, I think it's true that they're a little more likely to be like ideologues for a certain, they're very sensitive to group dynamics. That they don't want to be. I've worked with all women, so I've like seen this many times. They really focus a lot more on like the group dynamic than the end goal.
Yes.
And they view their jobs. This is obviously a generalization. Not all women are like this, but often they view their jobs, particularly in groups, as like promoting the health of the group, which is their natural instinct. It's totally fine. Whereas men view it as like, let's get the job actually done. Like, let's just
Yeah.
do the job. So I think that the big challenge we have right now is, and I think that this is a big problem with like trying to use rationalism to fight wokeness, is that the remedy to this is going to be different because there are so many women in these middle manager positions now in this power structure that the change is going to have to look different than it has in the past. I don't know
So
what it looks like, but yeah.
I've got an anecdote about that. So I was in a meeting with some people from Walmart years ago, and they were trying to figure out how to sell Walmart to working moms. And they were like, well, what is the benefit that working moms get from Walmart? And I tried to apply a rational argument. I said, well, you save money, you can do all your shopping in one place, so you save time. Uh, so that's more time for your family, more spending, more money you have for summer camp or whatever, Like, it's a very practical thing. And I spent an hour arguing with them about this because they were like, no. Like, what is the benefit?
That's really funny.
It's like, well, the things I just said, but I want to say it was one of those, as you know, people who outside of corporate America don't realize how much doesn't get done. How much is just having meetings
Oh my God.
go nowhere.
So insane. Well, and that's why I think maybe financial, if we do have a crash, that'll save us somewhat, because these horrible structures that are just adult daycares will have to go away, because nobody's going to pay for them anymore. But we'll see. No, that's a hilarious anecdote, and it's a perfect example of what we're talking about. It's like so many of the more centrist people are like, well, we can defeat the trans people with rational arguments. It's like, nah, there's no, you can't. It's not a rational discussion that's being had here. It's all about, virtue signaling and are you a good person? And, these much more feminine views of meaning and benefit, as you're saying. And I think that looking at it that way tells you a lot about why we're headed this way. So, but again, where do you see us in 10 years, do you think?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got away from the original question.
Okay.
I think things are probably going to get worse before they get better. I think there are going to be some bitter fights, particularly around the trans issue. We're starting to see more and more detransitioners come out and say, why did you let this happen to me? But right now they're being painted as bigots. So it's like, it doesn't matter that they've been through this and they're, physically messed up for the rest of their lives. Like, oh, well, you're a bigot for, suggesting this wasn't the. So I think we're going to see a lot more fights in coming years around identities, particularly gender identity, sexual identity. But I think that also we're getting to a point where people are having enough to where they're going to be like, time out. We got to put a pause on this. Like, even not to keep using my oldest daughter as an example, but we had a discussion the other day about where she said, why is everything about sexuality? Why is everything about, it's like, can we just talk about other things that are more interesting about people than their sexual identity? And so I think that's, so we could also end up in a much better place. But I think that financially as a nation, that's going to bring I think we're going to have a lot of headaches there also, so the fight could go in a completely different direction. Because what is it? Social Security is supposed to really go bankrupt in 4 years, I think it is. So we could be having a discussion about, what barter system we're going to use. But I do think that we're going to also see more normalcy, as we've seen in recent elections. One positive of COVID was that parents saw what was happening in schools and things like that. And so they're starting to push back and take a more active role. So I don't know. I guess I could see it either. We could either be in a much more bitter fight in 10 years, or where I would like to see, what I'm hopeful for is that we've reverted back to having more realistic discussions about things that actually matter to the majority of people, rather than letting 1, 2, 3% of society dictate the direction.
Yeah, I know I think it's kind of actually reversed. I think we're going to get better in the short run, because I think that there's kind of two enemies here. Like enemy number one is this group of the managerial class of communists, basically, bio-Leninists, whatever you would call them, and they just got to get out. We just have to get them out, and once they get out, things will get better for a time, but then we're going to have to tangle with. I think a lot of this is coming from the fact that now there can be a one world government. Like, you could do it now because of the internet, right? So when you can do something, a vacuum opens up. And I think part of the reason why we're seeing what we're seeing is that there's this massive vacuum, at the top of the globe, where a single hegemonic entity could exist. And that's why it's globalists what we call of as globalists are these kind of like weird power structures that are starting to fill that vacuum, even though they don't even really want to. It's just happening because they can. And so that's why you have this weird stuff of like the World Economic Fund guy, with Klaus Schwab, you have
who of course dresses like a supervillain just to
Yeah,
completely
right.
play the part.
Right. So I think you have this happening, but it's not actually super intentional. It's like I think it's actually more of the fact it's sort of disorganized, and nobody really is. People are kind of like, well, we should be doing it about tolerance, so let's put a rainbow flag everywhere. We don't know really what to do, and it makes us more money anyway, as you said. So, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was going to just agree with you.
Yeah,
I was going to agree and amplify. I think that's what we're seeing with big business. It's not necessarily that big businesses want to become like a secondary government that's pushing through, but they have these same goals they share with leaders around the world, and they're like, well, if nobody's going to do it, then I guess we should.
I guess we should do it. And like we have this kind of vague ideology of like tolerance, and it's very utilitarian. It's like, well, we're maximizing the good. It's like that hilarious cartoon of like the white kid who's like, my bike was stolen and I was hurt, but I realized the guy who stole it needed it more than me. So actually the world is better off and I'm happy. It's these horrible utilitarian rationalist arguments that just rob humanity of any of the natural like feelings that we have, which is much more evil. But they just don't have any other ideology, really, and so that this is just kind of what they default to. So I think that group is actually going to be easier to get out than people think. And if we can get in a Desantis, I think he's the perfect guy to basically purge that group. And then we'll get back to like stability. But then we're going to have to tangle with the fact that there is this big hole at the top of the world structure now where we're so connected now, you can kind of have a single leader of the world. Like it's possible. And then what do we do? Like now, who goes there? How do we fill that hole? That's a very difficult challenge.
Yeah. And it's difficult to predict because, I mean, I'm a little older than you, but you've been alive long enough to like imagining where we are today.
Yeah.
When Obama was first elected, like we're talking about, just 2008. So not in just a little over a decade, we've gone in a radically different direction. So it's so hard to predict how quickly things are going to change.
Right. Exactly. I think you're really right. It's we're in such weird foreign territory that no one thought we were going to be in, that it's like, where do we go from here? Okay, let's finish up with you're doing some really interesting stuff recently with Federalist. I loved the piece that you wrote about the 20s rhyming with the 80s.
Yes.
Culturally.
So as a child of the 80s, I have very fond memories of the 80s. Not so much the fashion, although I'm starting to see that return. When I was a kid, I tried to have a mullet. My hair is too curly, but kids now are just wearing mullets, unironically. But at the same time, things were very dark. Gas prices were climbing. There were energy shortages, the threat of nuclear war. And we came from that into something much better with the election of Reagan. And, we did have the benefit of coming out of the 70s and into the 80s with Jimmy Carter, who Joe Biden has done his best to burnish Carter's history by coming in and just like, oh, you were bad? Just wait. I'm going to do a much worse job and clean this up for you. But the moment where it kind of struck me was the success of Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
And it was a very pro-America movie where, it's just unbelievable. This team goes in, defeats the unnamed bad guy.
Yeah, the unnamed. When of course they couldn't have it be a real country. It had to just be this like vague country.
Now, of course, the unit that Tom Cruise put together was appropriately diverse.
Yeah,
like the female Latina.
Yeah.
But And despite critics just panning it, it was a huge box office success. It's still in theaters right now. I went to see Bros the other night for a review that I really hope this review comes out so I didn't spend money and time on this terrible movie for just to watch it. But to contrast the two, so Bros is bad. Like the review I wrote, just kind of as a straight review, I didn't get into how repellent Billy Eichner, the star, is or anything. But it's supposed to be a comedy, and rom-coms are not known for being hilarious. But it really failed as a comedy, and it's failing at the box office. And so critics, Rotten Tomatoes, are just like, Bros is the greatest movie. Rolling Stone added it to its greatest comedies of the 21st century within days.
So fake.
You know, all the like Seth Meyers, Jimmy Kimmel, all those people are like, oh, Bros is great. You got to see it.
Yeah.
No, it's not great.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It's just fake. Yeah. All fake propaganda saying that. Yeah.
And so that's another, small thing that gives me opportunity is, despite what people are saying and despite what, we say when we're responding to a pollster or we're in polite conversation, our behavior suggests that we're not really down with the direction that we're being pushed.
Right. Very true. So last question, what advice do you have, a young guy like us who is, getting into the world of marketing and advertising and copywriting? What advice would you have for that young person?
Don't be afraid to articulate your ideas. Don't be afraid to argue. Don't be afraid to like push for things that you know are going to work. And just don't feel the need to follow the herd. It's difficult to be the only person in a room expressing an idea, or to, really push forcefully for something that will work. But if you're actually looking to make it in the world, you're going to have to be willing to stand up for some things. And that includes in your career. And you're going to be canceled for something. The way the cancel train moves, like, maybe, there are no videos of you using the N-word, in 1998 or something, but because it's constantly shifting to what is not allowed, everything's going to be not allowed. So just don't worry about
it. Just go move ahead.
Have your battles early. And if you're willing to suffer some slings and arrows, you'll emerge from it. Don't just, this sounds like a fortune cookie, but just don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, you want to feed your family, you want to feed yourself, you want to buy a car, whatever, but don't get caught up in that stuff.
Inspiring. I totally agree. I have the same advice. And, everybody who's bound behind the fear of, not making money, it's not a rational fear. Anyway, all right. Thank you so much. That was really great. So where can people find you?
So you can find me on the internet. Primarily, the only really public facing thing I have is Twitter. So it's at rcromwell4 on Twitter. You can find us at coffeeandcashone.com. You can find me at the Federalist. I've been writing for Spectator World some too. And yeah, so
really insightful stuff on, I need to I actually haven't seen your Spectator stuff, but I really think that you have great cultural insight on Federalist, and it's always really surprising and interesting stuff. You really have some great, I think for people looking for what a great culture columnist like used to be for the New York Times, it's you. It's like when people just need to follow you and read your, because it's always topical and funny, but also very insightful. So
thank you. And that would be advice I would give to, my approach to writing is something you could apply to careers as well. Don't be afraid to start off with a position you completely disagree with and try to convince yourself, because that will often help you hone your arguments, or maybe even change your arguments a little bit. Just a silly example, years ago when AMC was looking at banning texting in movie theaters. I wrote a piece about why AMC should 100% allow texting in movie theaters.
That's a good idea. Okay, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thanks, Isaac.
All right.